Wait, what if I told you that a small boy from a poor village in the Philippines walked onto a huge stage and sang so powerfully that even the toughest judge in the world, Simon Cowell, couldn't believe his ears? Face screaming in fear, and before this story ends, a moment happens that makes the entire audience stand up and cry. So make sure you watch till the end of this incredible journey. And if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another amazing story. The bright lights of the audition stage shone across the massive theater as thousands of people waited for the next contestant. Judges sat quietly behind their desk, expecting another ordinary performance. But backstage stood a shy 13-year-old Filipino boy named Marco. His hands trembled slightly as he held the microphone given to him by a stage assistant. Marco wore a simple white shirt that looked a little too big for him, worn jeans, and old sneakers that had clearly seen better days. His hair was neatly combed, but his nervous eyes revealed how overwhelmed he felt by the moment. Marco came from a small fishing village near Cebu in the Philippines. His family lived in a tiny wooden house built near the shoreline. Every morning before school, Marco helped his father push their old fishing boat into the ocean. The sea breeze, the sound of waves, and the cries of seagulls had been the soundtrack of his childhood. But there was another sound that always filled their little home: Marco's singing. His mother used to say that Marco began singing before he could even speak properly. When he was just 6 years old, he would stand on a small wooden chair and sing along to old songs played on their broken radio. One singer fascinated him more than anyone else: Elvis Presley. The deep voice, the emotion, the passion in Elvis's music made Marco dream of a life far beyond the fishing village. But life was not easy for Marco's family. Some days the fishing nets came back almost empty. His father worked tirelessly under the hot sun just to earn enough money for rice and basic food. Marco often saw the worry in his parents' eyes when they thought he wasn't looking. Still, whenever Marco sang, the whole house seemed to forget its problems for a few minutes. One evening, while the family ate dinner under the dim light of a small lamp, Marco told his parents about his dream. He wanted to audition for a famous talent show. At first, his father stayed silent. Traveling to the big city and auditioning seemed impossible for a poor family like theirs. But Marco's mother placed her hand gently on his father's arm and said something simple that changed everything. Let him try. The following weeks were filled with sacrifices. Marco's father sold an old fishing net to help pay for the travel. His mother stitched Marco's shirt again and again so it would look neat. Neighbors in the village even collected a little money to support the boy who had entertained them for years with his singing. And finally, Marco stood on that giant stage. When his name was announced, the audience clapped politely as the small boy walked toward the microphone. The judges looked curious. Simon Cowell leaned slightly forward, studying the young contestant. So what's your name? Simon asked. My name is Marco, sir, the boy replied softly. And where are you from? I'm from the Philippines, from a small fishing village. The audience gave a warm cheer. Simon smiled slightly. And what will you sing today? Marco took a deep breath. I will sing an Elvis Presley song. The crowd murmured with surprise. Singing Elvis in front of millions of viewers was a bold choice even for experienced singers. Simon raised his eyebrows. All right, Marco, let's hear it. The music began softly. For a moment, the theater fell silent. Then Marco started singing. The very first note stunned the room. His voice was deep, powerful, and filled with emotion far beyond his years. It carried the same soulful energy that made Elvis Presley legendary. The audience's eyes widened as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. The judges looked at each other in disbelief. Simon Cowell slowly leaned back in his chair, clearly shocked. As Marco continued singing, something magical happened. His nervousness disappeared, replaced by pure passion. Every lyric felt real. Every note echoed through the theater like a wave of emotion washing over the audience. People began whispering. Some covered their mouths in amazement. A few audience members even started crying. The small boy from a fishing village was not just singing, he was pouring his entire life story into the music. Halfway through the performance, the entire audience stood up in a thunderous standing ovation. The applause grew louder and louder, but Marco kept singing with all his heart. Backstage, cameras captured Marco's parents watching from a small screen. His mother wiped tears from her eyes while his father stood frozen in disbelief. When Marco reached the final note, he held it perfectly. The theater exploded with applause. People cheered, clapped, and shouted his name. Simon Cowell shook his head slowly, smiling in amazement. "That was unbelievable," he said. The judges gave their comments one by one, praising Marco's incredible talent. But Simon remained quiet for a moment, staring at the young boy on stage. Finally he spoke. "Marco, I've heard many singers perform Elvis songs. But what you just did was something very special." The audience clapped again. Simon paused, then looked at the golden button in front of him. "You reminded me why shows like this exist. To find people like you." Marco looked confused. Then suddenly, Simon slammed the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling as the audience screamed with excitement. The magical rain of gold covered the stage while Marco stood frozen in shock. He couldn't believe it. His dream had just come true. Marco fell to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion. His parents rushed onto the stage, hugging their son tightly as golden confetti continued to fall around them. Simon stood up, smiling. "That voice," he said, "is going to change your life." The audience kept cheering for minutes. But the most powerful moment wasn't the golden buzzer. It was the look on Marco's parents' faces, a mixture of pride, disbelief, and pure joy. That small boy who once sang in a tiny wooden house by the sea had just amazed the entire world. Marco's story quickly spread across the internet. Millions of people watched his performance. His journey reminded everyone that talent can come from anywhere, even the smallest villages. Dreams don't belong only to the rich or the famous. Sometimes they belong to a boy with a simple shirt, old sneakers, and a voice powerful enough to move the world. And Marco's journey had only just begun. If this story touched your heart, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Because somewhere out there, another dream is waiting to be discovered, and the next incredible moment might be just one story away. Wait, stop scrolling for a moment. Imagine a small boy walking onto one of the biggest stages in the world. The judges barely expect anything special. The audience is quiet. But seconds later, that same boy opens his mouth to sing, and the entire room freezes. Even Simon Cowell can't believe what he's hearing. By the end of this story, something incredible will happen that leaves the entire theater standing and crying. So stay with me until the end, and if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful moment. The stage lights shined brightly across the massive theater as the host announced the next contestant. People clapped politely, expecting another performance like any other. But backstage stood a quiet 13-year-old boy named Marco Santos from the Philippines. He held the microphone with slightly shaking hands. His clothes were simple: a plain white shirt, faded jeans, and worn-out sneakers. His black hair was neatly combed, but his nervous eyes showed how overwhelmed he felt standing there. Marco wasn't from a rich family. He grew up in a small fishing village near Cebu in the Philippines. His family lived in a tiny wooden house close to the ocean where the sound of waves was louder than the noise of the city. Every morning before school, Marco helped his father prepare the fishing boat. Sometimes the sea was kind, and they caught enough fish to sell at the market. But many days the nets came back nearly empty. Even during the hardest days, one thing always brought hope into their home: Marco's singing. From the time he was very young, Marco loved music. His family owned an old radio that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Whenever it played songs, Marco would sit beside it and sing along. The singer he admired the most was Elvis Presley. Marco listened to Elvis songs again and again, trying to copy every note and emotion. His mother often smiled when she heard him singing in the house. "Your voice is special," she would say softly. But Marco never imagined that one day he would sing on a stage where millions of people could hear him. One evening, after dinner, Marco gathered the courage to tell his parents about his dream. He wanted to travel to the city and audition for a world-famous talent show. His father looked worried. They barely had enough money for daily needs, and traveling to the city was expensive. But Marco's mother believed in her son. She looked at her husband and said quietly, "Sometimes dreams are worth the risk." Those words changed everything. The next few weeks were full of sacrifices. Marco's father sold an extra fishing net to help pay for the travel. Neighbors from the village collected a small amount of money to support the boy who had. Wait, before you skip this video, imagine this: a quiet boy from a small fishing village walks onto one of the biggest talent stages in the world. The judges look unsure. The audience expects nothing special. But the moment he sings, the entire room goes silent. Even the famously tough judge Simon Cowell is left speechless. And what happens a few minutes later will shock everyone in the theater. So stay with this story until the end, and if you love emotional and inspiring stories like this, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next incredible moment. The stage lights glowed brightly across the enormous theater as the host announced the next contestant. The audience clapped politely while cameras moved toward the stage entrance. Slowly, a small boy walked out. He looked nervous but determined. His name was Daniel Reyes, a 12-year-old boy from the Philippines. Daniel wore a simple blue shirt tucked into slightly faded jeans. His shoes were old but carefully cleaned. His black hair was short and neatly combed, and his eyes carried a mixture of fear and hope as he stepped toward the microphone. The judges watched quietly. Among them sat Simon Cowell, known around the world for his honest and often brutal opinions. Simon leaned forward slightly. "Hello there. What's your name?" he asked. "My name is Daniel, sir," the boy replied softly. "And where are you from, Daniel?" "I'm from the Philippines, from a small village near the sea." The audience clapped warmly. Simon smiled slightly. "And how old are you?" "I'm 12. The judges exchanged quick looks. A 12-year-old choosing to perform on such a massive stage was already brave. "So Daniel," Simon continued, "what are you going to sing for us today?" Daniel swallowed nervously before answering. "I will sing a song by Elvis Presley." The audience murmured in surprise. Singing an Elvis Presley song was a big challenge even for professional singers. Simon raised an eyebrow. "Okay, that's a brave choice." Daniel nodded quietly. But what no one in the theater knew was the long journey that brought him to that moment. Daniel grew up in a very poor fishing village in the Philippines. His father worked long hours at sea, often leaving before sunrise and returning after sunset with a small basket of fish. His mother sold vegetables in a small roadside stall to help support the family. Life was difficult. Some days the family had very little food. Electricity in their home worked only sometimes, and the wooden walls of their small house shook whenever strong winds came from the ocean. But there was one thing that filled the house with joy: Daniel's voice. Since he was a small child, Daniel loved singing. The family owned an old radio that played music whenever the signal was strong enough. One day a song by Elvis Presley played through the crackling speakers. Daniel stopped everything and listened carefully. From that moment, he fell in love with the music of Elvis. He practiced every day, singing while helping his mother cook, while walking to school, and even while helping his father repair fishing nets. Sometimes neighbors would stop outside their house just to listen to the young boy sing. One day, Daniel's school teacher heard him singing during a small school event. She was amazed by his voice and encouraged him to audition for an international talent show. At first Daniel thought it was impossible. His family had no money for such a trip. But his teacher refused to give up. She helped raise money from local villagers. His father sold extra fishing equipment. Slowly, the small village came together to support the boy who had brought them so much happiness with his music. And now, Daniel stood on one of the biggest stages in the world. Back in the theater, the music finally began. The first notes of the song echoed softly. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Then he started singing. The first note stunned the entire room. His voice was deep, powerful, and unbelievably emotional for someone so young. The sound filled the theater like a wave. The audience immediately leaned forward. The judges looked shocked. Simon Cowell slowly sat up straighter in his chair. As Daniel continued singing, his nervousness disappeared. Every lyric carried real emotion, as if he were telling the story of his own life. The crowd fell completely silent. Then whispers began spreading through the theater. Wow! Is that really his voice? People looked at each other in amazement. Some audience members already had tears in their eyes. Backstage, Daniel's parents watched from a small monitor. His mother covered her mouth as tears rolled down her face. His father stared proudly at the screen, his eyes shining. On stage, Daniel reached the powerful middle part of the song. His voice soared higher and stronger than before. Suddenly the audience jumped to their feet. A standing ovation began while he was still singing. But Daniel stayed focused, finishing the song with incredible control and emotion. When he sang the final note, the entire theater exploded with applause. People shouted and clapped as if they had just witnessed something magical. Simon Cowell slowly shook his head, smiling in disbelief. "That was extraordinary," he said. Another judge added, "You have a very rare gift." Daniel stood quietly, trying to hold back his emotions. Simon leaned forward again. "You know, Daniel, I've heard thousands of singers in my life. But it's very rare to see someone your age perform with that much soul." The audience cheered. Simon paused for a moment, looking at the famous golden button on the desk. "You came here from a small village with a big dream," Simon continued. "And sometimes dreams deserve a little help." Daniel looked confused. Then suddenly, Simon slammed the golden buzzer. Golden confetti burst from the ceiling and rained down across the stage. The audience screamed with excitement. Daniel stood frozen, completely shocked. Tears filled his eyes as the golden confetti fell around him like sparkling rain. His parents rushed onto the stage and hugged their son tightly while the crowd continued cheering. Simon smiled proudly. "That voice," he said, "is going to change your life." Within hours, Daniel's performance spread across the internet. Millions of people watched the video and shared it everywhere. People from all over the world were inspired by the story of a boy who came from a small fishing village and amazed the entire world with his voice. His story reminded everyone of something powerful. Talent can come from anywhere. Dreams can begin in the smallest places. And sometimes, the world is only one brave moment away from discovering them. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional and inspiring stories just like this. Because the next incredible dream might already be waiting for its moment to shine. Simon Cowell's expression slowly changed from curiosity to complete amazement. Marco continued singing with growing confidence. Every lyric felt honest and heartfelt. It wasn't just a performance, it felt like a story coming straight from his soul. The audience began whispering. Some people covered their mouths. A few audience members even had tears in their eyes. Halfway through the song, something magical happened. The entire theater stood up in a massive standing ovation while Marco was still singing. But he stayed focused, pouring every bit of emotion into the music. Backstage, cameras showed Marco's parents watching the performance on a small screen. His mother wiped tears from her face while his father stood silent, unable to believe what he was witnessing. When Marco reached the final note, he held it perfectly. The theater exploded with applause. People shouted, cheered, and clapped louder than ever before. Simon Cowell slowly stood up from his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "That was incredible," he said. The other judges praised Marco for his amazing voice and emotional performance. But Simon remained thoughtful for a moment. Finally, he looked at Marco again. You know, Marco, Simon said, I've heard many people sing Elvis songs. But what you did tonight was something very rare. The audience clapped loudly again. Simon then placed his hand near the golden button on the desk. You reminded everyone here why we search for talent around the world. Marco looked confused. Then suddenly, Simon slammed the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling and rained down across the stage. The audience screamed with excitement as the magical moment filled the theater. Marco stood frozen in shock. He couldn't believe it. Tears filled his eyes as golden confetti covered the stage. His parents rushed toward him, hugging their son tightly while the crowd continued cheering. Simon smiled proudly. That voice, he said, is going to change your life. Marco's performance quickly spread across the internet. Millions of people watched the video. People from around the world were inspired by the young boy who came from a tiny fishing village and amazed everyone with his talent. His story reminded people of something important. Dreams don't care where you come from. Sometimes the most powerful voices rise from the smallest places. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one stage, and one brave step to change everything. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more amazing and emotional stories like this. Because somewhere in the world right now, another dream is waiting for its moment to shine.